Greetings and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So here we are back at the Great Prog War. This is battle number 25 and it's round number 3 now. So these are the first two combatants in it, and this is striking up to be quite the competition between these two. Voyage of the Acolyte by Steve Hackett and Genesis Nursery Cryme. Well, one thing is for certain, Steve Hackett's going through to the next round no matter what happens. Sorry, I just had to say that, as obvious as it is. So we'll start with the Genesis album. As you know, this is a masterpiece album in my collection. 3 songs on this album are among my favorite Genesis songs of all time: Music Box, The Return of the Giant Hogweed, and The Fountain of Salmacy. But there's also Harlequin and Seven Stones are on here, all good tracks. Like, there's no weak stuff on this album. The album cover I like quite a bit. The only thing that kind of makes this album less than perfect is it's an older, not as clear, a little bit muddled sounding, not terribly so, just a little bit, but great. There's some great music on this album. I listened to it today, and although I'm getting a little bit worn from it from the last 2 or 3 listens over less than a week, still pretty solid album. I really was into listening to The Fountain of Salmacy again today. Like, I just forgot how great that song is. Anyways, and as you know, Steve Hackett is a member of Genesis, so he's going up against his former band. Really strong. Now on this particular album here, The Voyage of the Acolyte, now this album has been claimed to be the lost Genesis album. I don't really think it's that. I think it's because it came out in the one year when Genesis didn't actually have an album out. So it got kind of labeled as being the lost Genesis album. And considering the fact that 3 members of Genesis are on this album, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, and Steve Hackett, I can understand why people might come to that conclusion. It's more of an instrumental than vocal. The vocals are not particularly strong on this album. In fact, I believe of the 8 tracks, I think 3 of them have vocals and then the rest are instrumentals. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not necessarily. I'm just looking. For a second I wanted to see, 1, 2, 3, that's as I thought. 3 of the songs have lyrics to them and vocals, and Phil Collins does do vocals on one of the tracks. I believe it's the Star of Cyrus. I think that's the one. But his vocals are very different than they are once he got placed in the position to be the vocalist, taking over from Peter Gabriel. Once he earned that job and became the vocalist, his strength of vocals became much stronger. They're not as strong on this album. It's kind of a bit laid back. It's him. It's clearly him singing. You can hear it, but it's not as frontal as it is on the Genesis albums of Trick of the Tail and Wind and the Wuthering. But still, pretty good vocals here. This album is more in its instrumentation. Some really interesting sounds on this album, and the more I listen to it, the more I'm intrigued by them. The one particular song, The Tower That Struck Down, there's a kind of a bass keyboard part that go together, kind of a heavy, almost like a marching sound, but it's quite good, and I liked it. I noticed it a lot this particular listening to, and enjoyed it quite a bit. Of course, my favorite track on the album is Shadows of the Hierophant. I think that's how I pronounce it, Hierophant. Yeah, that's the way I pronounced it before. I'm sticking with that pronunciation. So a solid album, you know, like some nice real guitar bits, some nice kind of atmospheric kind of proggy sounds to it. Of course, it has a nice cover too. Probably the cover is superior to the Genesis cover in some ways. So when when appearing on this album, of course, Steve Hackett, his brother John, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, John Adcock, Sally Oldfield, who does do some vocals on one of the tracks, Robin Miller, and Nigel Warren Green. He plays the solo cello on it. So it's got some really good, interesting instrumentation on it. I really, like I said, I really liked this Shadows of the Hierophant. I think that is an underrated song and really good. So this album had its strongest outing today, I think. I've actually listened to it on my stereo system in the room, and I really quite enjoyed it a lot. The Genesis album wasn't as strong as it was the last time out, but still pretty strong album. That Fountain of Salmacy is unmatched on either of these albums, I think. And it's a lot closer than I would have thought. But still, Genesis is just a little bit too strong for this album today. And so Steve Hackett is going to go on to the next round, but he's going to go as a member of Genesis. And perhaps that's apropos, since that's where he gained his fame from. But this album is now it's been in my waiting list to go on the playlist, and I think it's going to get a good lengthy run on that, and maybe by the end of it might be able to win the battle. But today it's not going to, so it's going off, and Genesis will move on to the last two rounds, and I will put them both where they belong so I do not forget. Actually, I may hold off on this one because it's got to go up here, actually. Right back in where it belongs. So, another interesting conflict, another battle, and I think Ben put some nice combinations here together. We're going to see some nice combinations. These are going to be all really strong battles. And there's no sure-cut winner at this point in time. There's a couple of strong candidates to go to the finals, but not necessarily going to go there. There's a couple of blockers in the way, and it could go either way depending on how I feel. I almost thought about giving it to Steve Hackett today, but once I listened to the Fountain of Salmacy, my decision was made that it was Genesis. So Genesis will be going on. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Which album did you like better? Which of these two albums do you like better? What songs on the albums do you like better? Do you think that the Genesis album is so much stronger, or do you think that the Steve Hackett album, it really is kind of a missing Genesis album? You let me know. I'd be interested to hear what people think. Always open to it. Thank you. So have a good night, and we will see you on the next battle, which will occur on the 20th. Well, this one's going to come out tomorrow, so that one will come out on the following day. Have a good one. Good night.